Good start. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'll be here giving you an update on Friedreich's ataxia research. So the overview of the talk, I'll start off by telling you a bit about the activities that Ataxia UK does to advance research. I'll move on to developments in new treatments in Friedreich's ataxia, and lastly, talk about some of the opportunities that there are to take part in research in the UK. So to start off, what does the Ataxia UK do in terms of research? So one of the main things that we've been doing since the start of Ataxia UK is funding research projects. So we fund projects globally, and we normally tend to fund small projects that lead to pilot data that then can be used to apply for larger grants. And we monitor the research that we fund, and the latest impact report shows that for every pound Ataxia UK spent on research projects raised £5 in further funding for ataxia research. And that really shows that the researchers we're funding are committed to research and they're being successful in continuing researching on ataxia by getting further funding. And we also monitor a number of other things in terms of the impact. We organise a number of research events. So the biggest one we do is the International Congress for Ataxia Research that we organise collaboratively with our partners, National Ataxia Foundation and FARA in the US, and recently the Ataxia Global Initiative. So the latest one we held was in November in London, and that was hugely successful. It was the biggest conference that we have done to date. There were 80 talks, 350 research presentation posters, and over 600 people attended. So we were really pleased with that. And this is a series of congresses that we're doing, and we're already planning the next one in 2026 in Atlanta in the US. We've organised smaller events, one for UK researchers to really encourage networking amongst UK researchers, and that was in 2023. And at the end of this month, we're organising a conference that's specifically on clinical trials and inviting selected researchers who are really specialists in clinical research in ataxia. We're inviting pharmaceutical companies, patient groups, and also the regulators. So we're really kind of trying to have a focused discussion all together to try and advance trials in research in ataxia and lead to successful treatments. Ataxia UK forms a link between researchers and ataxia community. Because of having the database of knowing who has ataxia, we are able to help in recruitment to studies. So as you know, we often reach out to you asking if you're interested in taking part in all sorts of different studies. We ensure that the people with ataxia are engaged in research and that the patient voice is really very much heard. We also work with pharma and biotech companies. So we encourage them, for example, to be involved in ataxia research. If they're new to the field, we explain the landscape, make introductions to experts, and we assist in different ways in their drug development programs. One way, for example, is to collect useful information, such as in surveys. And you will be very familiar with us asking you to complete numerous surveys, which really gather very, very important information, not just for pharma companies, but for researchers in general. You can read more about our research strategy in our document, the research strategy document that's on our website. Other things that we're really sort of very much pushing for are making sure that we put the results of research into practice. And one good example of that is a research project that we funded at the University of Strathclyde on speech therapy that then went on to be developed into a service that Ataxia UK provides to people with ataxia, a speech therapy service. We represent people with ataxia in global initiatives. We get invited to a number of different consortia, and we're able to sort of put the patient voice forward there. And we very much involve people with ataxia in research. And lastly, we publicise and provide information about ataxia research, such as in events like today. So moving on now to developments in new treatments for Friedreich's ataxia. Everyone, I'm sure, is very familiar, the cause of Friedreich's ataxia. As you go along here from the left, it is caused by a mistake in the frataxin gene. There's an increase in number of GAA repeats, and that leads to a reduction in a protein called frataxin. And this reduction in frataxin protein has a number of consequences within the cells of people with Friedreich's ataxia. So it leads to an increase in oxidative stress. It leads to an increase in iron within the mitochondria, and the mitochondria are the part within the cell that are responsible for the production of energy. They lead to cell damage. There's a disruption in the function of the mitochondria. And as I said, because it's involved in the production of energy, you end up with a reduction in energy in cells. So all these things cause symptoms of FA, essentially. There's a number of different things that happen. And the importance of mentioning this pathway is that you can try and target at each step. So you can try and develop treatments that target all these processes. So for example, there could be genetic approaches to correct or replace the frataxin gene that would target this point in the pathway. You can try and increase the amount of frataxin protein, or you can develop treatments that target some of these disruptions in the cell processes to try and stop the damage being done within cells. And I'll go through each of these processes in the next few slides. So the genetic approaches, gene therapy. So I'm going to talk about some trials that are ongoing. So Lexeo Therapeutics is a company that has developed a gene therapy product designed to transfer frataxin gene to heart cells. So it's specifically targeting the cardiomyopathy that people with Friedreich's experience. And this is by intravenous injection. So they've done a phase 1/2 clinical trial where they showed that there were no safety concerns, and they were able to show that there was an increase in the frataxin when cardiac biopsies were done after 3 months of treatment. So essentially, that's what we're trying to do, is improve the amount of frataxin, and this is what they showed in the trial. Interim data also showed some clinically meaningful improvements in the cardiac markers and also in some neurological measures. Now, they were able to get, in July this year, a breakthrough therapy designation from the FDA, which essentially gives it a sort of speedier process. And it's an acknowledgement from the FDA that they are supportive of the data that was provided up till now. Now, the important thing at this point is that there is a natural history study that is ongoing, and they're hoping to collect information on this and to make sure they use this data to act as a control arm for then the interventional trial. And the interventional trial, well, they'll be testing this gene therapy product and hoping it to be a registrational trial, will take place in 2026. And it will include UK sites. So this is a really important thing for UK, our members in the UK, is that it will include UK sites. And as soon as Lexeo provide us the information on the sites, we'll be able to let you know, and it will be publicised very widely with all our normal routes of communication. Now, there are a number of genetic approaches in FA which are at the preclinical stage, so that Lexeo is already at the trial stage. But there are many groups around the world, and we've spoken about groups in Spain that we funded in the past, and in France, and globally, really, looking at gene therapy for FA, and they've developed a number of different... Oh, sorry, touched too soon. Can't slide. Yeah. But I wanted to highlight two particular companies that are working on gene therapy approaches. The first one is Voyager Therapeutics and Neuroendocrine Biosciences, and they've developed a gene therapy replacement of frataxin gene. It's delivered by intravenous injection, but using this capsid that actually crosses the blood-brain barrier. So the idea is that it will also reach the brain. And they've got to the point that they've selected a lead candidate drug, and they're expecting human trials next year. The other one is Solid Biosciences, and they've also developed a gene replacement therapy, which will deliver frataxin gene to the brain and the heart. So both points that are important in Friedreich's ataxia. And they've shown some positive results from mouse studies where they were able to reverse the cardiac implications in FA and improve neurological function. And phase 1 trials are due to begin in the US towards the end of this year, hopefully. Now, having spoken about gene therapy, the next sort of way of targeting Friedreich's is by increasing frataxin protein. So one company that is looking at this is Larimar Therapeutics, who developed this protein replacement therapy that will deliver frataxin directly to the mitochondria, which is where frataxin is normally found and where it acts, where it functions. So they had some phase 2 placebo-controlled trials that started back in 2022, and this was followed by an open label extension, meaning that everybody was on the drug. Literally the other day, on the 29th of September, they reported an update. So where we are at the moment is that skin frataxin levels had similar levels of frataxin to people who were asymptomatic carriers, so like parents of people with Friedreich's who don't actually have any symptoms, after 6 months. So that's really encouraging because you don't need to go any further in terms of frataxin levels probably. You probably can reach the level of asymptomatic carriers. And some clinical outcomes had some potential benefit. This was 65 people had been dosed so far with this treatment. In terms of safety, they did report some severe allergic reaction in 7 people. So they said that they changed the dosing regimen. And they're now starting a phase 3 global trial that's planned to start in late 2025. And the site selection is ongoing with that. So we will let you know as soon as we know more on that. The plan is to have marketing application to the FDA next year. And they've had a number of discussions with the FDA that they've reported. And one of them is that the FDA said they were open to considering that frataxin level increases in the skin could be an endpoint that they would consider to see whether they would give it marketing authorization. Now, another approach is one being done by Design Therapeutics, where they have developed a product that will target these GAA repeats in the frataxin gene and lead to an increase in frataxin protein. So they did phase 1 trials, which showed some initial promising results. They then wanted to improve the formulation, and they've developed this new formulation that showed improved absorption and improved safety that they reported. And they've now dosed the first person with FA in a phase 1 trial earlier this year, and they expect to produce some results next year. Now, the next sort of list of treatments is ones that are looking at these disruptive processes, the oxidative stress, the disruption in mitochondrial function. And the prime example of that is omaveloxolone that I'm sure everybody's familiar with. Brand name is Skyclarys. It was developed initially by Pharmaceuticals and is now owned by Biogen. And as you all know, it's the first approved drug for FA. The FDA approval for adults aged 16 and over came in February 2023. This was followed by approval for EU countries by the European Medicine Agency in February 2024. And we were really delighted to see that the UK regulator, the MHRA, approved omaveloxolone in use for adults or people aged 16 and over in April this year. So as I mentioned, omaveloxolone targets this oxidative stress and disrupted mitochondrial function and reduced energy production. So this is what it does. So it reduces the damage caused by these low frataxin levels. So omaveloxolone is thought to be a disease-modifying treatment for FA. There was the trial. I'm not going to go into the details of the trial, but it was a global trial to test omaveloxolone, and the London Ataxia Centre was the UK trial site in this global study. So it was divided into 2 parts. Part 1 looked at safety and efficacy, and then part 2. So they were essentially placebo-controlled trial followed by an open label extension where everybody was on the drug. And they were able to show significant improvement in the mFARS, which is the rating scale specifically for Friedreich's ataxia. The next thing that they also did was they used comparison to natural history data. So they looked at people who were on the trial, who were taking the drug, and did a comparison, a matched comparison to the natural history data, and they were able to show that OMAV slowed progression. And all this data was what the company took to the FDA, the EMA, and MHRA to get the approval. So this very much highlights the importance of this natural history data and the importance of having done it over many years, of having years of data showing the progression of Friedreich's ataxia. Because then if you know how it progresses and how different groups of people, different ages progress, you can then use that as a marker when you're trying to see whether a treatment is slowing this progression. Now, the next steps, obviously, after the successful clinical trial is you need to get the approval from a regulatory agency. As I mentioned, in the UK, it's the MHRA, and with omaveloxolone, we've got this approval. But the next step in the UK is that different bodies need to decide whether the NHS will provide the treatment for free, will it reimburse the treatment. So in England, this organisation that deals with this is called NICE, and Wales and Northern Ireland follow guidance from NICE, and in Scotland, it's called the Scottish Medicine Consortium. So where are we now in terms of access to omaveloxolone? So the NICE evaluation process did start. So it starts off first with a scoping stage where NICE decides what they will actually be evaluating. So one of the questions that came up, for example, was whether they would evaluate the use of omaveloxolone for all people with Friedreich's or maybe for a subgroup of people. So Ataxia UK was part of this scoping process, and there was a meeting back in August 2024, and we argued strongly that omaveloxolone should be considered for all people with Friedreich's. And we were pleased that NICE took this on board, and they decided to evaluate the reimbursement of omaveloxolone for all people with Friedreich's. So the submission took place. Ataxia UK was part of the submission as well in January 2025. And within that submission, what patient groups like ourselves can do is really highlight what it's like to have Friedreich's ataxia, what it's like to live with it on a day-to-day basis. So what we did is we reached out to all of you and asked for case studies that we then put together in this written submission. And that is really valuable information. So we're really grateful for everybody who contributed. And we got lots of people who did contribute to this. And then we were looking forward to the evaluation meeting in June, but unfortunately in April, Biogen then withdrew from this NICE evaluation process. And the reason being that NICE had told them that they would not be able to progress their submission to the committee evaluation stage. So essentially it was as if the process was stopped. And so at this point, Ataxia UK started the campaign. You can read more about our campaign on our website. We are arguing for early access to omaveloxolone. We are aware that the NICE evaluation process needs to start again, but we are arguing that in the meantime, whilst the NICE evaluation takes place or starts and then takes place, there should be interim early access. And this is something that is happening in other European countries, that there are government schemes where early access is available. And this is part of our campaign. We've written to the Department of Health and Social Care. Many of you signed our open letter. In fact, we got 10,000 signatures to our open letter, which was amazing. And we're continuing the campaign. So you can read more about it on our website. Now, in Scotland, as I mentioned, there's a different process. There's the Scottish Medicine Consortium. So in June, the company submitted to the SMC for evaluation. And the plan, as far as we've heard, Ataxia UK is a stakeholder of the SMC, so they have told us that we will be part of this process. There should be a meeting in November. And then the decision time would be 18 to 22 weeks after this committee meeting, although there could be some delays, I imagine. But this is, in theory, what should happen. So that's what's happening in Scotland at the moment. Now, the difference in Scotland is that whilst this process is taking place, there is an interim access pathway available. So clinicians, if they know that there's a patient who's interested in being prescribed omaveloxolone, clinicians can put individual funding requests to their health board to ask for interim access to omaveloxolone. And we've asked people in Scotland to get in touch with us if they have had, if their neurologists are interested in this, we can support them and provide information to see whether they will succeed in getting this interim access. Now, in terms of children, as I've said up till now, the omaveloxolone is only approved for people aged 16 and over. So there is a pediatric trial of omaveloxolone ongoing. There was initially a phase 1 study that only took place in the US that started in 2024, and it's to assess the safety and tolerability. Then this is now followed by an open label extension. And there is now a global phase 3 pediatric trial, which started in June this year. It's a placebo-controlled trial followed by open label extension. And the exciting thing for the UK is that there are actually 2 UK sites taking part in this trial, one at the Sheffield Ataxia Centre and the other one at the London Ataxia Centre. So if anybody's interested, do go to our website for more information about how you can take part and who you can get in touch with. And this is really important because if any parents are considering their children having onvaloxolone, this would be a way of accessing onvaloxolone by being on the trial. So do get in touch with us, with these centres, to know more if you are interested in taking part. Now, moving on from onvaloxolone, vatiquinone is a product that was developed by PTC Therapeutics, which is also looking at this disruption of cell processes. They did a big trial, global trial, phase 3 trial called MOVE-FA. Unfortunately, in September 23, they reported that there was no significant change in the overall mFARS score when they looked at placebo versus treated group. But they did say that there was a meaningful clinical benefit in upright stability, which is important in terms of movement, and speech and swallowing. And so in that time, they sort of had discussions with the FDA, and they submitted to the FDA to try and see if they could get approval on this data. Unfortunately, in August this year, the FDA said that they did not approve vatiquinone to treat adults and children with FA because this was a trial that was also involving children, so it would have been a treatment for both adults and children. And the FDA said that they would like to see further evidence in another trial before they can submit to another submission to the FDA. Now, those are some of the developments. There are many, many things going on, but I wanted to highlight some of the trials that are going on. And then moving on to opportunities to take part in research in the UK. So, as I mentioned, there is the paediatric trial of onvaloxolone, which is called the BRAVE trial. Very much encourage people who are within the age of 2 to 15 for parents to look this trial up and see if they're interested for their children to take part. There is another pilot study that is ongoing at the moment that has been just funded by Ataxia UK, and it's looking at augmented reality. So it's a study taking place in Birmingham, and they're trying to test in this pilot study with whether augmented reality can improve balance in the ataxias, and that includes a range of ataxias, including Friedreich's. So augmented reality adds computer-generated images to the real world, allowing people to see exaggerated version of their own movements. And the idea is that this could help the brain to adjust and improve stability. So it's kind of a symptom relief kind of treatment. Participants would need to try to visit Aston University in Birmingham weekly for 8 to 12 weeks. There's more details on the actual trial on our website. So if you're interested in taking part in this trial is supposed to be starting in November. Now, natural history and progression studies. So there's a study in Newcastle where they're using wearable technology to investigate the impact of FA on balance in the gait, both in the lab and in real world settings. So if you're interested in that in Newcastle, do go to our website. And then there's the EFACS natural history study, which is a study that's been ongoing for many years, and it's been, the UK site is in London and it involved other sites in Europe. And as I mentioned earlier, the importance of these natural history studies in being used in trials is really, really to be highlighted. Now, there's this new FA Global Clinical Consortium, which involves a number of sites in different countries. And the Unified Study is a harmonized protocol whereby you're doing the same natural history studies in lots of different sites. And EFACS is being incorporated into this global study. So essentially, if you're part of EFACS, you'll be part of this global study where the data can be shared amongst all the different studies and really can be used in clinical trials and design of trials and the evaluation of results of trials. Then a new project that we've just funded at the University of Strathclyde is one where we're looking at supporting people with ataxia. And the researchers there are designing an audio support message for people with ataxia who have speech difficulties. So it's a little bit like a telephone version of the I'm Not Drunk ID cards that Ataxia UK has. And more details on this will follow, but I just wanted to sort of highlight the fact that we're doing some research that should hopefully lead to some improved services for people with ataxia, including Friedreich's. There are a number of surveys, as I mentioned, the importance of these surveys. So at the moment, we're doing a gene therapy survey that we're running to collect the opinions of people on gene therapy research from people diagnosed with FA and other genetic ataxias. And as you can see, there are actually now gene therapy trials in FA. So it's really, really important currently to see what people's views are and help us design these trials. So this gene therapy survey was part of an EU-funded project called Treat-ARCA, and it involves a collaboration with a number of academic researchers together with Ataxia UK and some other patient groups as well. And then there's one that's recently completed that hopefully many of you took part in, that was looking at the burden of illness, or the FA quality of life and daily activities survey that we circulated recently. Another recently awarded grant that Ataxia UK funded was research which aimed to develop a mechanism to support carers of people with progressive ataxias. So this research will involve surveys, interviews and focus groups, and then the aim would be to try and develop a carer support package depending on the issues that were developed, that were identified. And this is an example where Ataxia UK provided 10% of funding that unlocked some funding from another source. So it's really useful that we were able to do that so that this important research can go forward. Now, this is just a reminder where to go on our website. There's a section called Taking Part in Research for any opportunities that there are to take part in research at the moment. So thank you very much for listening.